Hello, subscribers. We have Krystofer Robin with us today. Christopher's a buddy of mine. He's a longtime supporter. He has contributed to the gaming community. He's just an all around great guy with lots of gaming experience. So, welcome, Christopher.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And I know other followers, especially on the Discord channel, really appreciate this and getting to know you more and getting to know all your perspectives on gaming.
Oh, I think they already know them.
All right. So we'll just jump right into the interview. The first kind of category we have is generally just some basic personal information about yourself. The first question I'm going to ask, because other people may have the same question, is Krystofer Robin your real name?
It is my real name. My first and middle name are Christopher Robin. So I did not like that when I was a kid in school until last 2 years of high school when I found out that it didn't matter if I was weird and awkward and, wore black shirts with dead people on them. Girls thought it was really cute that I was named after a teddy bear. And then I liked my name and I've just gone with it ever since.
That's awesome. Okay. So what year were you born? And if you don't want to say the year, if you want to get around to the
79.
79, all right,
Yep.
great. And where do you live?
Uh, it's about an hour and a half northeast of Dallas, kind of close to Oklahoma.
Oh, nice. You enjoy it out there, I'm assuming.
Everything except the heat.
And what is your primary profession?
Technically, I work in architectural product manufacturing, but I babysit robots. That's the bulk of my job. I make molds and models of materials that are going to go on buildings to make them pretty, like cornices, columns, statues, balustrades, that sort of stuff. I design and make the molds or make models depending on the job. And I do a lot of that in CAD and Blender. And then I translate that over through to CNC machines. And then I sit at the end of the machine watching it mill away for days and days and days on end and maintain the machine, make sure it's all working. So I have a lot of downtime most of the time. I'll have 2 or 3 days of really focused work on the computer, and then I'm out in the shop just sitting.
Gotcha. Well, that probably opens up time for you to do other things then, right?
Yeah, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts. Um, the YouTube stuff is generally maker crafter stuff because I'm into all that.
Nice. What other types of jobs have you had in the past?
So I've been with this company for 18 years. Before that, I worked about a decade on oil rigs. So I did roughnecking for almost a decade, and it
Wow.
was a kind of a big shift to go from the outdoor, like big, hard working, dirty job to working at a desk and getting a little dusty sometimes. But I got injured working on the rig, and it was for an oil rig injury, it was really minor. For people in an office, they would probably be horrified by what I got some nerve damage in my elbow,
Mm.
and that would be horrific to them because it's out of the norm. But I had a good reason not to go back to the oil field. You spend a lot of time away from home, but I had this girl I was seeing, and things were getting pretty serious. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something different.
Nice. Well,
So
good for you. Have you always kind of had the drive to want to do crafting type things?
yeah, yeah, I've always been uh, either sewing or like sketching and specifically building things like making models and diorama type stuff. That's been since I was a little kid. So it started probably with Legos and Lincoln Logs that build a thing. And then as I got older, it translated into like Technic Legos for a while. And then into, well, I don't need to be locked into these bricks and these shapes. I can make things out of clay and cardboard and paper and plaster.
That's awesome. We definitely need people like you. Holy moly. I have no ability to do that kind of thing.
Neither do I, but I've convinced everyone otherwise.
Well, for 18 years, you've definitely pulled the wool over their eyes.
Yeah, I've done some pretty big jobs. So.
Yeah, I've seen some of your pictures on Discord. Um, that giant, what was that? It was something that was so huge you couldn't even fit it in the camera when you got back like 50 feet away.
Oh, well, I've done a few like that, but I think the one I would have posted would have been a more interesting one. So probably the tree houses for the El Paso Zoo.
Okay.
They were 34 feet. So even our 48-foot shop clearance, it was a big hangar for something back in the day. It barely fit in there, and we had to assemble it to test fit everything, and then we had to take it completely apart and crate it all up and drive it across Texas, which for people not from Texas and not familiar with Texas, El Paso to where we are is about 12 hours in a straight line. So it's a long haul.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll move on to, unless there's something else you want to share about you personally, we can move on to gaming.
Uh, uh, I have a built-in gaming crew because I have so many kids, but other than that,
That's
not
great.
really.
That's great. How many kids do you have?
Five total.
Five. Nice.
Yeah, they're most of them are adults now, so they're other people's problem, but they're 25, 24, 20, 14, and 12.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a big spread on the age there.
a little bit.
Okay, so I know you've worked on gaming related things for the community before. Do you want to describe some of the things that you've done?
Well, a long time ago, for about 3 years, I ran a Neverwinter Nights server, and I have jumped around things like that. I was pretty involved with Ultima Online server emulation stuff for a good 5 or 6 years, and then I kind of let all that go, and now I play once in a while. I don't really do that. Uh, Most of my like putting things back into gaming has been in like physical world doing board game stuff because that's number one on my list is board games, and then everything else after that. Then like video games I do play video games, but it's primarily board game stuff. You guys post your retro game screenshots, and I'm posting 40-year-old board game shots. To me, it's basically the same. I see the connection between the design philosophies between both sides, and I don't really differentiate them, which is a little opposite of how I handle everything else because I compartmentalize everything so much. But when it comes to play and gaming, it all serves the same function for everyone. So I put it all together in the same box.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I completely agree. And as far as the tabletop or board games you have helped with, do you want to describe those games and what roles you played?
Uh, Most recently and actively, I've been a playtester for the lead designer for Lock and Load Tactical. It's a hex encounter war game. Uh, it's it's a lot of fun, but it comes with the problem of a game that I love and loved to play. I am burned out on between, hey, here's this bunch of stuff. Can you go over this? And I go through them probably too much. I don't look at a scenario and run it twice and go, oh, it's fine. I run it 10, 15, 20 times. I log every dice roll. If I see patterns in bad dice, I make sure to jot that down that this was because of bad dice. And then other things like I think there may be a problem with the balancing of these two. And so when I've finished, by the time the product comes out, I don't touch it. Like though I've got one on the wall that I've never actually opened that box aside from pull the lid off and go, awesome, it's cool and done, and then closed it up and it lives on the shelf. And that part is the little bit of a drawback, but I've done that. I did some consulting and testing with Cactus Games for Redemption, a couple of little indie games. One was called, I believe, Victory 7. That was a few years ago. I worked on the tabletop creator or tabletop simulator release of that. I did testing for Deliverance from Low End Games, and there's a few others. I've got one that I can't really talk about at the moment, but that's kind of cool and big, and maybe sometime in the next 6 months I can say more about it. But it's a lot of like started as just play tester, and then just not I didn't force the issue like I'm gonna make myself useful to this community. It was I get into their it's a lot easier today than it was 20 years ago. But I was in their Discord and someone comes in with a rules question and I'm like, oh, I'm sitting at the end of a machine babysitting. Let me look that up, or already know the answer. And then answer, and you do that for a while, and next thing you know, somebody says, hey, do you want to look at this before everybody else gets to see it? And then you have a Dropbox and you have all the new projects sitting in there and you go through them. And it kind of built to that. And I'm pushing to pursue it further so I like what I do now, but I can't do it forever and I don't want to do it forever. I'd like to move away from that and push out into where I've spent my whole life with board games. So getting over towards that is kind of the slow move over.
Nice. Well, that's exciting. And these are two gifts that you had sent me a while back. I don't know if you remember
I
that.
I did. Yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
I played both of these. Both were amazing. I did beat Dungeon Lords. It took quite a while. Cyber Mage, I actually need to get back to that. Gosh, it's probably been 2 years since I.
Mage is weird.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, I really appreciate that. So I'm sure you've done that kind of thing too for other people in the gaming community where you've, you know, studied what they like, send them something fun or interesting, and that's really appreciated.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's an old board game that a buddy of mine had mentioned a few times that he has a copy, but he doesn't want to open it and tear punch the components out because it'll lose all its value and it's kind of expensive. And he had mentioned that once. It's like I have all the tools and the ability. I can duplicate that whole game with cardboard and paper and make all the cards. So I spent a weekend and made a copy and sent him that. So I do that. That I can't make a video game. Sorry, or I would have done that.
No,
I
that.
also that was a trick to get you to autograph the rule manual for your board game. So
Oh, well, you didn't
it
have to
wasn't
trick me.
entirely a trick. It was hey, here's a good excuse to send that booklet his way.
Oh, that's great. I would have signed that for you anyway.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Do you foresee possibly designing a game yourself in the future?
I have designed three completed. Um, they're all terrible, so they probably won't see. Well, okay, one of them I actually have some stuff on the desk here where I've laid out in tape, kind of reworking to clean it up. I'm hoping to hand make about 15 copies of that to give out this Christmas. But mostly I've designed stuff when I was a kid, like way back,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all junk. The kids' stuff is junk. But in the last 7 or 8 years, I've done three, and none of them are particularly good, but they were a good exercise. This third one, I think some people would get something out of it, but it's not a game that I would enjoy. So it's kind of odd that, oh, I designed this thing and I don't like it. But it was the exercise of, okay, here is a game fundamental. Like this is a certain type of rule, like asymmetric gaming or perfectly symmetrical, perfect information game, all these different sort of categorizations. And okay, so I want to make something that fits this little gap to see if I can get that and understand all those concepts, and came up with these little small games. One of them I think would work at least as a gift for people like, hey, look, I designed this and it's Christmas themed, so there you go.
That's
But
a
big stuff, uh, I'm 15% through working on one that I've been on for a year and a half. So it takes a lot of time, especially when it's likely to not see the light of day. So uh, making something that big in scope is more just something that I put some time into once in a while. And I know that not every person is like Isaac Childress who can show up and say, hey, I designed this game. Do you guys want to buy it? And you make $13 million on Kickstarter just out of the blue with your third first proper game design, but like your third entry into your resume, and you blow up. That doesn't happen to anybody. So to think that what I'm doing is going to do that, well, I don't. But I also know that getting a publisher is nearly impossible. So I have to do every bit of the legwork and have this in a presentable state to even consider putting it out on like Kickstarter or GameFound to get attention,
mhm.
or just dump the whole thing part and parcel for free out into the print and play community and just let people go with it. And if it takes off, then move it over to a physical for sale product, which is, I think, the way I'm going to go with it.
Mhm. Oh, that's great. Do you get enjoyment out of the actual creation process? Not the physical creation, but the designing and coming up with the story and rules and everything?
I no, no. There are parts that I like when I have an intention for. I think this is how things should work, and then solving the puzzle of how to turn that into a rule set that you can explain to somebody else and isn't hard to remember, so people aren't having to look in the rules constantly to, oh, well, how do I make this unit attack that unit, and you got to go look through 700 pages of stuff. Solving those little problems, I like that part. But the building the machine, I do not actually like the whole building of the game engine. It's very tedious, and it takes the creative spark for the vision of the finished thing, and it dilutes it down to these little completely mundane and boring little nuggets that individually do nothing. And until you have all of them, you can't see this big picture. And I like that picture there. I would prefer to work within the confines of someone else's engine that already works, and I'm just focusing on the output. But doing it from ground zero up, I feel is really important to be able to do that other step. So I'm going through that grind of that one step at a time, even if it's not my favorite part.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes complete sense. That's how I feel about programming. I I've done it for so long. I really hate it because it's like you're saying, I know exactly what I want in the end. I can envision all that. That's the fun part. But now I got to put all this together to make it happen. I know how to do that, but I have to spend the time now to actually put all that together to just do it. So,
You have to just distill all the fun out of it
yep,
and just turn it into this raw data. And I guess it's programming. I'm just programming people to move cardboard around for me instead of programming a computer to move bits. But
yep,
it does sap some of the excitement out of, well, this is my idea and it'll be great someday, maybe.
yeah.
Or, well, I have to figure out how to explain that this goes to here without confusing any other. It's not fun. It is
Got,
interesting, but it's not fun.
yeah, I gotcha. Okay, so I know you have been a game master in various games because I was actually a participant in one of your Dungeon
Mm.
Crawl classics. So, do you do that type of thing very often? Do you want to talk about being a game master?
Uh, so I did it originally back when I was a teenager because my little group of friends, we wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, and nobody else was willing to learn all the components and run the game. So the first person to not say not it gets to be it. And so I've always been the reluctant DM. I enjoy the creativity part behind like setting up and coming up, planning the story and the places, but then going through and balancing out. That's when you get down to the little tiny, the nuts and bolts, and there's not a spark there anymore. You're just working out the math, and it's that part doesn't interest me as much. But I do. I ran that. We did that DCC stuff for a while. I ran a Fate campaign for about a year and a half, and I do. I run games for myself. I solo role play, but that's not exactly the same thing. But that's it. I would much prefer to be on the other side of the screen. That's where I want to actually uncover all the mysteries instead of knowing all the answers all the time,
Ah,
and then being asked questions that have nothing to do with the question at hand. But you still have to come up with the answer. Like I never thought you'd care what that dog's name was. I don't know. Let me roll some dice and make something up.
that's great. Oh, that's funny. Do you prefer playing in a group or do you prefer solo?
I thought I preferred playing with a group of people. And then the more times I've played with more groups of people, the more I've found that my level of enthusiasm is not matched by other people. And it's not fair to them for me to get frustrated that they aren't engaged the same level I am. And it's also not fair to me to like lose the enjoyment that I had in the thing. And the best way for me to solve that little problem is to just play by myself. So I started solo gaming a long time ago, and I've dabbled in getting back with a group of people. And I have a friend that every week he comes over, we play a game together, but he matches my level of commitment and enthusiasm. So we meet up really well in that. But once I start bringing in more people, it just turns, just put a casual game on the table where it doesn't matter. It's an activity while you chit chat. And that's how I group play now. Uh, Video games is the same way. Uh, I don't like MMOs where everybody has to grind up their level and be together and all that. No, something like Ultima where hey, if we meet up and hang out for a bit, cool. And if we don't, I can go off and do my own thing by myself and have just as good a time. And I do better just on my own, which is not really antisocial. Just I don't other people don't fulfill my expectations, and I feel guilty expecting them to. So I just stay away from doing it.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Do you ever plan on doing live stream?
I used to stream painting miniatures, and I streamed League of Legends for a little while, like everybody else did. Um, Although I that was just a once a week thing, and then I did for about a month. I streamed this old MMO, Anarchy Online. I didn't want to play League that night, and I didn't want to paint, so I was like, I'm gonna jump on Anarchy, and I just threw the stream up. And instead of having 8 or 9 people in there, I had 40 something people in the first night. Where are you all coming from? Because nobody else was ever streaming that game. So somebody would see that and what is that? And they jump in, and I was ignoring all those people because I didn't expect there to be anybody in there. So I didn't have that window open. I get an hour and a half in, and I switch over and see the chat. Go, oh, there's people in here. Hi, hello.
Oh, that's
Uh,
great.
this is an old game. Sorry, I wasn't talking to you. I don't know what to do. I don't feel personable enough to really stream like that. I don't mind having my camera going while I'm painting or even playing a board game or something like that. I do that. I've got a couple of buddies that watch me play my board games a couple of times a week. But to a big audience, I don't see why anybody would pick to watch me over somebody else. And I don't really want to put the amount of effort into it to push it to a bigger group of people to try to take a part of that share from the few people that do that same thing. So yeah, not really. For friends, sure, but just as a big public thing, I wouldn't. I don't think I'd do that really.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like what I stream is what I want to play. And if people want to watch, great. If not, that's fine. What's the oldest memory you have in regards to games, whether it's some kind of tabletop game or a video game?
I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my grandfather gave me an Apple II that they had just retired from the library, and there was a copy of Zork and Joust with it. And Zork seemed super cool, but when you're 6 or 7, not good to play. But Joust, I could just do the type in the joust.bat and go, and then click away and make the little ostrich jump around and bop the other ostriches and get the eggs. And I thought that was the neatest thing ever. That's the earliest I remember.
Do you feel like nostalgia has a big impact on a person's playing experience for games?
I think that nostalgia has a big impact for people in general. Yes. For me, no. I don't I don't experience nostalgia. I'm like a right now novelty driven person. So something being 35 years old does not give it a bonus check mark in my list of things. I don't care if it's 40 years old or 4 days old. If it's good, it's good and I like it. And if it's not, I don't. And I don't afford a pass to things like, oh, well, it was a different time and things were simpler, so it can get away with being bad or boring. Nope, you don't get a free pass from me. But I know that's not the normal. Most people, I think, definitely have like their era. Usually, they're with like 10 to 16-year-old age range tends to be their sweet spot, and that's like their golden years that they remember all that stuff fondly. And I say it all the time to my somewhat older and same age buddies, like, yeah, the good old days. I was there. They sucked because everything was terrible then. Everything's terrible now. We look backwards on that and see only the good things because that's what survived the filter of 40 years. You don't flip on the classic rock station and hear the terrible little local band that got one song on the radio for 3 weeks. You don't hear that because that's been filtered out.
Mhm.
So when you look backwards, as you say, well, look, all the music was so great and all the movies were so great. It's like, no, because you've already filtered all the trash out. You've had decades to get all the garbage out, and all that's left is what's good. We have that today. We just don't have the filter yet, but you can filter it. That's your job. You filter it. Go, oh, this is bad. This is good. Because there's great stuff today. And I don't want to miss out on that by being stuck. Like, oh, I exclusively play things from the late 80s, early 90s when I was a kid. No, I still play some of that, but I also play stuff that came out this year because some of that's good. So nostalgia is the you had a couple of things on the list like what about nostalgia this I'm like, oh, I don't, you're not going to like that answer, I don't think, because I don't value it at all
No,
personally. But
no,
for other
that
people, I get it.
yeah, no, that's really interesting. Because I think, like you said, most people do have influence from nostalgia. So that's actually really cool that you're not impacted by it. Because personally, for me, I know I am not probably not nearly as much as most people, but it does impact me somewhat. And I think it's just because it brings back, for me, it brings back some of those good memories that are related. It really doesn't have anything to do with the game itself, for example, but if you had some good memories that the game reminds you of, it kind of brings
Yeah,
those back and just kind of raises your mood overall so that you're, enjoying it more. But yeah, if you don't have those great associations, I could totally see why it's just not a thing.
that's not, it's not a lack of those associations, I just don't, there's this big, I notice it now, and it's probably always been there. I don't think things change very much, so it's probably always been there and I am only just noticing it now at 45. But there is this window where, your current peer group looks backwards fondly on this window of time, and anything associated with that, they just automatically like. And even if it's not good, they'll make excuses for it, or they'll just accept that it's not that great, but they'll still like, oh no, it's great, I love it. It's because it's from the late '80s. Oh, this is the greatest. I don't get that part of nostalgia. I don't get, but like a thing, that especially with music, I can remember super vivid details of things by listening to a specific album that, the first time I went to Colorado, I was listening to this album. And if I listen to that, I can remember all of the things that were going on then much better than if I try to remember, oh yeah, when I was 13, we went to Colorado and I sat by the little creek just chucking little rocks in and there were the fish. I remember that. No, if I listen to that album, I can smell the forest, I can hear the water again, and okay, now that brings everything back. But I don't fixate on that album because of that. I value it for that. But that, if it was a bad album, I wouldn't remember it anyway.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. So do you have any funny experiences that you'd like to share related to gaming?
I have one thing, and maybe without context, it'll paint me in a bad light, but I'm gonna go with it. Uh, Quite a long time back when I was playing Ultima Online very heavily, my guild and I went to an in-game wedding and we murdered everyone. We bombed the wedding, and some of us, a couple of guys got temporarily banned, and then some of us got jailed for a while. But it was we knew about it, it was coming up, and we planned in advance, and we ran in and dropped explosive potions everywhere, and people started falling and dying. And so that's a criminal offense. You get hit by the guards and killed. And so we had a second wave of 4 players that would run in and butcher all the bodies, because then all the loot hits the ground and then anybody can pick it up and it's not theft. And then we had 2 people come in and just load up pack horses with as much stuff as they could get and take off out of there. The 2 guys pulling the pack horses got a week ban for exploiting, because that was considered an exploit. That, oh yeah, you're trying to bypass the system to make off with this stuff. Uh, and the only other people that got any like got in-game jail time were the guys who were saying really hateful stuff while they did it. They were just
Uh,
talking really trash. All the rest of it was just like, hey, I mean, you can do that. So, but that was the first thing that came. I was, oh yeah, when we bombed that wedding, that was pretty funny.
oh,
It
that's
probably wasn't funny for the people that were doing it, but we thought it was funny.
oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I bet some of them were mad.
Oh yeah, these
Uh,
days I don't I don't abide by griefing. Like, let other people have their good time. You don't
yeah,
have to like it, just do your own thing. So
yeah.
that would be on my list of no, you don't get to do that in my game. You don't get
Mm-hmm.
to ruin other people's good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. Do you have a general timeline of all the gaming platforms that you've used over the years?
Uh, well, yeah, when I was 6 or 7, pretty it was somewhere in that little time window, I got an Apple II, and I ended up learning how to type on that. And I had just Joust and Zork for a while, and then my granddad brought me a bunch of other old games for it, because even then that was an old machine. Um, then I got my parents had an Atari that they finally broke out and let me play with when I was about 10. I got a Nintendo about 2 years after it came out, and I didn't like most of the games on it. There were a few over the years that I ended up finding that I really liked. Like I liked Zelda and Final Fantasy. I never cared for the Mario's. Uh, I did like Felix the Cat, which is, a bad Mario knockoff, but I liked Felix, and I loved Kirby. But that was the Nintendo was dead. Like it was at the very end of Nintendo's life when Kirby came out. I loved Kirby. I still love Kirby. That's a great game. Uh, I got a Sega Genesis somewhere in that span towards the end of playing Nintendo a bunch. and mostly played Sonic 1, 2, and 3. And we would rent games from the store, and most of them were not good. There were a few. Sega didn't really have many role-playing games, so it really didn't get any attention from me. I didn't ever have a Super Nintendo. I had a friend that had one, but I didn't have one. But I played lots of RPGs on the Nintendo, and then I had a Game Boy, and I played the Zelda and the was it the I can't remember what it's called, so it couldn't have been that good. Little kind of RPG, sort of like Final Fantasy, but not nearly as in depth. And Final Fantasy is pretty simple by today's standard. Uh, and I had a PC somewhere right around the time I got a Sega. I ended up with when I say it was a 386, and I played Castle of Winds and Windows 3.1 and a bunch of DOS shovelware, tons of just trash. Jill of the Jungle, that one wasn't trash. That was fun. Stuff like that. And then as I got up older into teenagers, I started playing a lot more board games than digital stuff. But we did end up with a PlayStation, and I played like Final Fantasy VII, which I didn't like. Uh, then once I was an adult, I pretty much just was exclusively PC. I haven't really had many consoles since the original PlayStation. I have in more recent years picked up a couple of the older ones for a specific game that can't be emulated or is exclusive to that hardware. So the most recent one for that though was The Last of Us on PlayStation 3. So I found a used PlayStation 3 and a copy of Last of Us, and I struggled to play that because I don't use a controller very often, but I got through it. Uh, I enjoyed the narrative of it, but the gameplay is not for me. I'm not good at it. I'm not used to it, but I like the story, so I muscled through that. And then yeah, I'm still very much like a PC gamer. I had consoles as a kid, but when I got older and it was my money and my choice, I just stuck with PC stuff. And lots of first person shooters and RPGs. That's been most of my gaming until the last decade.
Gotcha. Are RPGs your favorite genre in general then?
Favorites is hard to pick. Uh, I could pick a favorite RPG, but is RPG my favorite genre? I think it's close. Yeah. I like my favorite genre is sandbox, like directionless sandbox, where here's a world, here's the rules and how they work, here's things you can do, and you can build, create, craft, express yourself within this. So Minecraft is probably the best game that's ever been made. And it's ugly, but it hits every little box for me. It's do whatever you want, however you want, make the world the way you want it to be. And there's some stuff to do. So if you get bored of building something, you can go out and adventure a little bit and then go, okay, that's enough killing zombies. I'm going to go back and build my castle. It has all those things. And that's, yeah. But RPGs close fit to sandboxy because you kind of role play in those.
Mm-hmm.
I do anyway. So.
Mm-hmm. And I know you're a big fan of Dwarf Fortress.
Yes, that was about a decade ago. I got into that, and yeah, that's a big one. Dwarf Fortress and Cataclysm: Dark Days Ahead. Those are two of my all-time favorite games ever, and their end game is you die. There's no win condition in either game. It's you play until you die. It's my favorite.
I get the impression that you like games really unexpected things happen. Is that fair?
Emergent chaos, yes. I like games with emergent chaos. That's why I like Magic the Gathering because it has on the surface it has a really simple rule set that's pretty easy to teach somebody in 20, 30 minutes. It's only when you introduce the cards that the games gets complicated. And the more cards you introduce, the more complicated it gets. But you can take the same set of cards for 3 years and suddenly find a new interaction that just throws everything into turmoil. And that's that emergent complexity from simple components. That is the most enjoyable part of gaming for me, period. And it exists more in physical games than digital, because a lot of times when you start to interact components that weren't intended to interact in a video game, it tends to crash. But a board game, it still just sits there and you just kind of make it work. The computer game, if you put things together that weren't supposed to go together, it just throws you out and says, no, we're not doing that.
Right.
But yes, I like the emergent chaos. That's the sudden surprise, everything's gone sideways. That's the best part.
Cool. On that similar note, in your opinion, what do you think it takes to make a great game, whether tabletop or video game?
Player agency, giving players agency and not taking it away arbitrarily. That is, if you don't do that, you might as well not make the game. You have to give the player the ability to make meaningful choices and suffer the consequences of those choices. So taking away some of the player's ability is perfectly fine and acceptable so long as it's within the understood rules that if I do X, then Y will happen and Y is going to restrict me. That's fine. If you just arbitrarily take away agency you've handed to the player, it's the laziest form of difficulty and balancing possible. And it is so common that everybody's just used to it. And oh yeah, they give you all this stuff and then they take it away. How many games start with you being really powerful and you run through an introductory chapter and then they just take all that away from you? That's really lazy. Like there's another way to show the player what they are capable of without taking it away from them for no reason other than to make it easier for you to design the rest of your game.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can show them other things to let them get that feeling of, oh, I can get this powerful, or I can achieve this much, or I can push this far towards a goal. Well, no, you're teaching them the wrong lesson. They get to the end of your introduction, and then you take that all away, and I can't do any of that anymore. And now I have to grind out hours of time to be able to do what I started being able to do. Why would I play this game? I'll just replay the introduction and then uninstall it, which is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's player agency. If you're not player agency focused, you should be writing a novel. But make a novel, write music, make movies. Those things, the audience has no agency. They are passive. In gaming, both physical and digital gaming, you are inviting a person to involve themselves in your art, and you are giving them express permission and empowering them to alter that in some way and to navigate through it. So don't take the brush away once you hand it to them. It's rude and it's inconsiderate and it's lazy. So that's my agency. Big, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I spit that at people constantly. Like, hey, this would be better if you didn't take their agency away. Well, I don't understand that. I'll tell you. I'll tell you for 4 hours all about it.
Gotcha. Do you think that same principle applies to all games or just certain types of games? Because like some games, are really simple. The rules are simple, but like chess, for example, but it's extremely difficult. So would something like that apply to a game like chess?
It being difficult isn't taking away agency from the player. It's just difficult. It may be hard for them to achieve what they're capable of achieving. But a lot of you look back to older video gaming when it was mostly in the arcade, all those it's the same exact thing over and over and over again. It just keeps ramping up the speed and the amount of enemies or the amount of bullets coming at you, the amount of threats and ways to end your quarter so you have to feed another one into it. And the challenge was not in moving Pac-Man around the maze. The maze never changes. It's not even a maze, it's just a box of walls. You avoid the ghosts. That never changes no matter how long you play Pac-Man. That doesn't change. Same map, same rules. It just gets faster. So you're not taking away the player's agency by increasing the difficulty. You're just making them work to achieve. That's fine. And I think it's very rare that you can just arbitrarily take agency from the player and it not be a bad choice. It not be the wrong design choice.
Mm-hmm. Are there any games or mechanics in games that you consider revolutionary when they happened?
It's a difficult question. because even if you know your game history really well, you'll say, "Oh, this game let people do this for the first time," and someone will come in and say, "Oh, but actually, this other game a couple of years before that." Like, well, nobody's heard of that. So if we're talking about what mechanic had the biggest impacts, uh, uh, Dungeons and Dragons as a whole had a huge impact in the handing so much freedom over to the players instead of here's my 2 pages of rules. You have to do this. This is exactly how this works. It is a machine, and you turn the crank, and the result comes out. This was, hey, we don't have all the rules in here because you get to make them up as you go. You get to tell the story. That was huge. Was Dungeons and Dragons the first to do it? No. Was it the first that mattered? Yes. So that's not to belittle the previous entries, but they didn't catch on for some reason or another. Wrong place, wrong time, other problems with the design, whatever the case may be. But the big dog gets the bone. So yeah, Dungeons and Dragons had that impact. In video games, I already said it, Minecraft, enormous impact, both in gameplay space and in the business side of things. Minecraft was one of the first huge crowd-funded projects. It it's not responsible for Kickstarter, but that's sort of like, here's what I have, and it's gonna be this in some time, but I need money to get there. It didn't happen much. That was something you pitched to investors, bankers, and guys in suits, not to the kids that are going to play the game. So that on business side changed that, and then on the gameplay side, it was just like it's a box of Legos. Here you go. Something that everybody had wanted. They didn't know some people didn't know they wanted the box of Legos, and some people had begged for, where's my game that's just a box of Legos? And that it filled that slot really well. So that one was huge. And there's others that in other directions, things like Wolfenstein 3D or Doom. I say Doom really was the big one. Wolfenstein 3D kind of got everybody a taste of like first person gaming, and then Doom took that and cranked everything up to 11 and made it fast and really it feels more fluid to play. It gives you more agency. You can move easier. You got more control over where you go and how you apply your weapons here, there, and everywhere, how you navigate through the level. And so I think Doom is also a huge moment in, especially in video games, taking a platform that had previously been PC gaming was, it had a foothold, but everything was slow. The games were slower. Platformers on PCs were terrible. And Doom came in and said, no, no, you can do really fast things on pretty low end hardware if you have a genius coding the engine and cheating left, right, and center to make it work on everything. So that's important. Minecraft and like Dungeons and Dragons, Avalon Hill, early Avalon Hill games, especially their war game lines, kind of set the stage for every war game in the last 40 years. The From the way they wrote their manual to the way they stat the units out, those things have held over to today. And before that, different games would handle things slightly differently. And I don't know which game was the first that nailed this standard in. It might have been Tactics 2, but I think it was probably something a little after that that really like, this is now how every war game is going to be made or be compared to. And it just evolved to where today you open a modern war game and you start reading the manual and you can see those echoes from way, way back when like John Butterfield was working on something. Some little element that he injected into that genre still pops up in manuals today because it's just the convention. So those are the things that are most important and influential. And sometimes they're kind of invisible.
Hmm, interesting. Do you have any favorite game developers, whether tabletop or video?
I have a great deal of respect for John Carmack. There's a programmer guy. Um, it's mostly board game guys. Uh, I can't think of many video game Well, okay, like Roberta Williams sort of made point and click adventure games fashionable and popular. So she gets credit. And then yeah, John Carmack made a potato play Doom, so he should get some credit. But video games, I don't know a lot of the developers directly. I know some studios, and I know some studios were, golden children for a while and then they ran their name into the ground. But in board games, I have a few for different reasons. Like I already mentioned John Butterfield. He did one of my favorite solo games. Richard Hamblin, who did Magic Realm and Gunslinger, uh, and more modern guys like I mentioned earlier, Isaac Childress, who did Gloomhaven, just kind of put these different contrasting ideas together. And so let's take a little bit of like Euro game sensibility and inject it into the big classic chunky American dungeon crawler game and make this weird amalgam that shouldn't work but is absolutely brilliant and super tightly balanced. And so he partially got lucky. He was in the right place at the right time with the right idea. Somebody else could have come up with it sooner or later, but he's the guy who gets the credit. Andrew Lowen of Lowen Games, who just released Deliverance last year. Uh, there's a bunch of others, but yeah, there's tons. But the big ones, especially really influential in games that I've enjoyed, those guys specifically.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Do you
I didn't
have
leave Gary Gygax out as a slight. I don't do Dungeons and Dragons.
well, that's great. Do you have a favorite game at the moment that you enjoy playing?
The last 2 weeks, yes. I have a new favorite. It will wane out, but it'll stay very high on my list for a long time. But I do have a current favorite. It's from Van Ryder Games called Final Girl. It's a solitaire game where you have the final girl from a horror movie, and then there's a horror movie killer and a horror movie location, and you have to save as many victims as you can and either kill the killer or escape from the killer. Depends on the killer. And there's a multitude of boxes that contain two girls, a killer, and a location, and you can mix and match girls, killers, and locations to get all these emergent chaos that I love so much. And it's plays quick. The rules are easy and understandable. It goes really fast. Before that, for the last 7 or 8 months, I've been playing Malifaux a lot. That's a one v one PvP game with miniatures. You have 6 to 10 minis each, with each have their own unique powers, and you move around the battlefield trying to accomplish different goals. One goal you both know, and you each have two secret goals you're working towards, but they come from a shared pool, so you kind of have an idea. It's not strictly about killing each other, but that helps a lot of the time. So I like that. Uh, I recently finally got one of my holy grails, a copy of Raid on Saint Nazaire. Played that for about 2 weekends solid and love it. Definitely top 10 solo games.
Nice.
Favorite long time favorite board game would be Shadows of Brimstone. That's been like 8 years of lots and lots of playing that. So I do have favorites, but I tend to compartmentalize. What's my favorite solo game? What's my favorite role playing game? What's my favorite dungeon crawl? And then picking just one is I don't. They're too different for me to make an assessment which one's better. So
Right, right. Yeah, that's always a challenge. And one time I was thinking, I think it was on the Discord channel, I was trying to answer that same question for myself. And so I'm like, okay, well, it depends on your mood. There's so many factors. I'm like, well, I guess all I can do is boil it down to time, how much time I have spent over the years on a given game. Obviously, I must really like it, maybe even more than I think I like it because I spent that much time. And I ended up coming up with a game that I never would have picked as my favorite. But I'm like, wow, okay, if I spent that much time on that game, it must mean I really like it.
was it Wizardry 8?
It wasn't,
Because I would
no.
say that was your favorite. That would have to
Yeah.
be your favorite. You play that so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is my favorite to play, but I since It's a more of a recent game for me. I think I only learned about that about 5 years ago. I've had other games I grew up with as a child and still play today. So when I look at the amount of time that I spent on those based on when I learned about the game, I push that to the top of the list. But you're right. Wizardry 8 is my favorite to play right now.
If you, I don't, I don't track my board game playing as much as I think I want to. I
Hmm.
have apps to help do that. I have a Board Game Geek account that you can post all your plays and log the time, and I forget to do it. I'm too in the moment of playing with the cardboard to sit and fiddle with an app or keep a timer or anything.
Yeah.
But just thinking on it, most hours in a board game, 100% Shadows of Brimstone. I
Mm.
probably have 2 or 3 thousand hours of playing that game.
Mm-hmm.
Video games, according to Steam, my favorite video game is Ark.
Mm.
And I would have a hard time arguing that I didn't like playing with my dinosaurs. So I do like my dinosaur sandbox a lot.
Okay, so if you could change one thing about the gaming industry, whether it's tabletop or video, what would it be?
I would regulate microtransactions and loot boxes as gambling, so they fall under the commission of the gaming commission, or fall under the authority of the gaming commission, which would de facto lock underage children, minors, out of that market and would turn most adults away from that market. And then every company that has leaned into that for their revenue stream would then collapse in on themselves because they cannot survive without that because they make trash and they know they make trash, which is why they engineer it to be addictive. That would be the one thing I change. Just don't ban it. Like if you want to gamble, go ahead. I don't gamble, so I won't be participating. But if you want to, you can do that, but it should be regulated for what it is, which is gambling, and it shouldn't be in the hands of children who are spending enormous amounts of money. Billion-dollar industry mobile game, billions of dollar industry mobile gaming. And a lot of it's kids and young people with impulse control problems or not a lot of experience with financial responsibility. And it's gross and it has no place in gaming. Gaming's a very uh, healthy and necessary thing. Play in general is super important. And to turn it into this kind of gross, icky thing that these big companies that don't care about the people at all, they just care about extracting money from people. It makes it hard to express to people who don't engage in play very often that it is important and it's not just trying to rationalize playing with toys all the time. It's important for your development. It increases your cognitive function, your mobile dexterity. It has nothing but benefits to engage in some form of play, with a within a reasonable time. But it's easy for people to be like, no, it's not important, and cut school funding for play oriented stuff as opposed to just core academia because it doesn't get valued because, oh, that's just that garbage people throw away time and money on. No, it's just super important. Every mammal plays. There's a reason for that. It's critical for our brain, but we've polluted it. And that would be my change. Just shift that over into it's now gambling. You can still do it, but nobody will, and it'll go away.
Gotcha. Interesting. Do you have any big predictions for the future of gaming that you think will probably happen?
Probably happen. I think a lot of industry trends are going to get worse before they get better. That's what I think is going to happen. I don't know that they will necessarily get better. I think that's more just hoping that they do, like specifically that the predatory business practices that they're going to just continue to get worse because they are still continuing to get worse. They get more prolific. They're snuck in more and more places, and it's not getting better. And nobody seems to care because it generates too much money. So who's going to outlaw it when everybody's benefiting except for the people that are being exploited? And then nobody cares about them. Uh, is it going to get better? I would like it to. If it did, I think we would. lose a lot of games. A whole lot of franchises would die. Stuff like Magic the Gathering would die because it's been used as the shield to hide microtransactions behind for 2 decades. Like they put in their little gotcha loot boxes and microtransactions, and then when somebody says, "Hey, don't you think that's weird to push gambling on kids?" Like, no, it's like trading cards, like baseball cards and Magic the Gathering. They're like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's not a. It is a valid shield because Magic is gambling. For it to get better, my hope is that yeah, it gets regulated as gambling, but that changes the landscape a lot because we do lose a lot of things. I think what popularity Magic still retains is would die off from that because it's no longer available to children. And now that it's labeled as gambling, you have to show ID to buy it, and it would collapse. So I don't. I'm kind of pessimistic. I think no. I think it's just going to keep getting worse until everybody's broke. I don't. So if that's a change, I guess that's a change. They all collapse because they run out of money to take.
If something like that were to happen, would you think that more of the independent game developers would start to rise?
Yes, I think they already actually are. I think I think a bigger portion of the of gamers in general are starting to move away from those really big titles, but our population is increasing, and the availability of devices to play games on is increasing. So you end up getting more and more available players to scoop up. But I think a smaller percentage of that pool is engaged in that content. I think more people are coming in, seeing this, and going, "This is no, I don't like this. This is not for me," and looking outside of that. And we're seeing a lot more like they were calling it like AA games that are like pretty big studios, but they're still indie. They're not beholden to some massive company. They've just gotten big because they made good stuff and they're really popular. So they get big and they're not indie anymore, but they're not corporate monsters yet. So I think that would push even harder towards that. But I think we're already starting to see that in the last 10 years, start little games that had no business being so big in the market, like Minecraft, totally indie little thing that just took over the world for a while and still has a huge audience uh, more than a decade later. It's been out for 13 or 14. I don't remember the exact release date. Over a decade. So I think indie is going to get bigger, and maybe I would like to see indie become the norm because they are more experimental and they're not beholden to some massive investor machine that demands they make a certain sales number. They just make what they believe in, and if it doesn't work, they learn from it and try again. Versus the company, it's like we have to play it safe. We just got to make another Call of Duty.
Right, right. Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about here, Chris?
Just to make sure that everybody understands that I'm not when I say that I don't understand the thing with nostalgia, I'm not saying that people are like sad and joyless because they prefer that thing. No, that's what they get out of it. I'm just, novelty oriented. It's not a slight. When I was younger, I would happily just be rude and like, you're dumb, whatever. Now, no, no, everybody thinks differently and has a different experience of things. And mine is different from other people's, and I think it's great that they have a great time with the things they have a great time with, and go for it. I even like to watch them have a great time with the things that I don't necessarily like. I watch you play wizardry all the time. I don't like wizardry. I don't like wizardry at all. I still watch.
Well, Christopher, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciated your perspectives on things, and I know everyone else is going to too. So thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you for letting me participate in your lowest viewed video.
No, no, could end up going viral. You never know. They'll be like, "Man, this
Oh,
Christopher
please
guy."
no. No. I didn't even put my hair up or anything.
All right. Well, thanks again, Christopher. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day
Oh, you too, man.
streaming.